Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction, and also one of your instructors in the courses. And today it's my office hours, which means that it's your chance to ask any question that's on your mind that relates to cooking. And I will do my best to answer them. All right. A couple of things, as usual, that I want to mention as we get started. And the first one is that in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a dialog box that says Add Question Here. If you have a question or a comment, please go ahead and type that in, and it'll make its way into the queue, which you also see on the right-hand side of your page. The second thing I'll mention is, in that queue, with the individual questions in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. And if you would like a particular question answered sooner than later, you can click on that icon and it'll push it up in the queue in priority. Okay? And so keep those couple of things in mind, and we'll go ahead and get started with today's questions. And the first one is from Patricia. Is it safe to use aluminum foil as wraps or to line trays? And so this is an interesting question. If I approach it from a culinary standpoint, then yeah, you bet. It's very common to use. Many people use aluminum for its convenience, it's easy cleanup, to line trays or anything else for that matter. Now, whether or not an individual or a cook has a concern about food coming in contact with aluminum, I think that's perhaps a different discussion, and one that is very much an individual choice, right, at the end of the day. And I would direct you toward the interwebs. There is a lot of information. Some of it is anecdotal, and some of it is a little more detailed in its discussion. But read through some of those conversations around the use of aluminum and think critically around this topic, because it is an interesting one. All right, thank you. And next up from Don. Hello. What is the convection setting on an oven do? What type of cooking would it be used for? When would it be used over the bake setting? So the convection setting on a convection oven turns on or off the fan, right? That's located on the back wall of the oven. And by turning the convection setting on or turning the fan on, you circulate hot air more aggressively throughout the box, right, throughout the oven. And the result is that food items will brown faster and ultimately cook faster. And if you're not watching, they could burn faster as well. So, the quick answer is that the convection setting could be used with just about anything, where you want to increase the browning and at the same time decrease the cooking time. Now, what we often do is decrease the temperature also, by 15 or 20 degrees to start with. And then, you may need to make some adjustment beyond that to fine tune your particular appliance. But we drop the temperature, right, in order to control the degree of browning. So it gives us a little more time to react to what's in the oven. Okay. I'll give you an example of just things to be careful of. If you have sheet pans that are lined with parchment paper, try to put some food item at the corners to weigh down or hold down the parchment paper. Otherwise, it can get blown around, and oftentimes will fold up and over the food item. And if the item is a delicate item or a wet and sticky item, the parchment paper will stick in place, and then you'll have some results that you probably weren't expecting. Okay. But yeah, give it a try and see how you like that setting. All right, thank you. All right, next question. Is using the convection setting on an oven the same as using an air fryer? Now, this is a great question, and the quick answer is yes. They are fundamentally the same, right? An air fryer has a fan that circulates the hot air, which creates browning at a relatively fast rate. And because of that more aggressive movement of the air, it gets into the nooks and crannies of the food a little bit more evenly than a non-convection environment would. And so, yes, it is very much like the activity in an air fryer. Thank you. And next up, when doubling recipes, are there certain ingredients that don't need to be doubled because they would overpower the recipe? I'm thinking of the veg stock recipe, or when using ingredients that have a strong flavor like garlic, onions, or peppers. And yes, there are definitely ingredients, and you've addressed that category appropriately. These are the more pungent ingredients. When we scale up a recipe, especially scaling up, I would start by saying we want to do some testing of that recipe. And spices are probably the category of ingredient that might be of the biggest concern because they are often the most pungent items that we might use in the kitchen. And how you adjust that, you might bring it down to rather than doubling spices or other pungent ingredients with the recipe as a whole, you might keep it at the same level, or you might bring it up an additional 50%, and just see how you like it. Again, whenever we adjust recipes, either up or down or in some other fashion, meaning an ingredient change, it is best to test the recipe to see what turns out, and then take notes along the way and make further adjustments as needed. Okay, thank you. And the next question, how do you feel about using a pressure cooker to create vegetable broth? If you like that method, how long would you cook it for? Yes, I do like pressure cookers, generally speaking, and from time to time I do make a stock or a broth using a pressure cooker. And here, you can certainly consult the interwebs for perhaps some more detailed information. Although, again, you're bound to come across, if I remember correctly, a range of information, or a range of times, for example, which means that you, the cook, will need to do some testing, some experimentation on your part. But keep the general comparative times in mind across the various stock categories, meaning that vegetable stock and also seafood stock tends to be pretty quick. And then, if we move into bone stocks, chicken stock is going to take a little bit longer. And then the more dense bones like beef stock take even longer still. Okay. But, a pressure cooker can often cut the cooking time down to about 25% or so of what you might otherwise experience. So you might start with that number in mind and then give it a try. Once you get to that, let's say 25% mark, maybe it's the 33% mark, taste it and then take notes and then make adjustments as needed. Okay, but I think otherwise a pressure cooker is a wonderful tool or type of cooking technology to use because of its efficiency, its time efficiency. Thank you. Next up from Patricia, when preparing dishes whereupon the recipe states to add vinegar, how do we determine which type of vinegar to use? Are there tips to go by? White wine, rice, balsamic, red wine, apple cider, with the mother. Okay, those are some great examples. And So, in terms of what type of vinegar to use, a couple of considerations to keep in mind generally. So one is the color that your chosen vinegar will impart. Is it going to detract from your desired finished look? In other words, adding a typical balsamic vinegar to a light colored risotto is going to give it kind of a dark or even a dingy sort of a look, and you may not want that. So you might choose to reach for something else that's lighter colored. Okay. The other thing generally to keep in mind is the accompanying flavor of that vinegar. All right. So there's raspberry vinegar. There's all kinds of flavors that come attached to the vinegars, and so think about if that will be compatible with that finished dish that you have in mind. All right. There in that middle ground, I'll say there are a number of vinegars that are basically neutral or fairly neutral in flavor. So rice vinegar, your distilled white vinegar, white wine vinegar, champagne vinegar. These tend to be not only light in color, but also, as I mentioned, fairly light in flavor, such that it wouldn't necessarily skew a dish strongly in one direction or another. All right. Now, beyond that, just try out different types of vinegar. I think the beauty of this category of acidulant, right, or acidic ingredient is that many dishes, or maybe I should say a given dish, can take many different types of vinegars and come out in a delicious sort of way, albeit differently each time. And this is the discovery process, right? This is the joy of cooking as you tinker and play around in the kitchen. And if you're sort of wondering very cautiously about what the results might be, just remove a sample from the pot, dress it up with some of the vinegar that you have in mind, and taste it. And if you don't like it, then you've got the rest of the pot, right, to work with. All right. Give that a try. Thank you. And Patricia's asking, what does interweb mean? So the internet, just another term that you might hear for the internet. All right. Thank you. All right. Next question. When we write up a recipe, we have prepared our flavor and taste the same components. Are texture and mouthfeel the same? If not, how do these elements differ? So the first question, flavor versus taste, these we consider to be a little bit different, even though in daily conversation we might use these terms interchangeably, and I certainly do too, because there's a certain usage of these terms. But if we want to drill down a little bit deeper in terms of a more sort of a strict culinary context, then I think of, and I think many cooks think of taste as really focusing on these foundational elements of sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, and then also this idea of umami, which has become much more mainstream in the United States anyway, in about the last 20 years, even though it's been a term and a concept used in the Japanese kitchen for the last century. And so that's 5 elements that we typically talk about. Now, I also include astringent and pungent. And astringent is this this sensation of drying and pulling on the tongue and in the mouth. And so, for example, if you bite into a green banana, an underripe banana, that sort of a drying, pulling sensation is an example of astringency. For those of you that are wine drinkers, a tannic red wine that gives you that dry sensation on the palate is another example of astringency. And then pungency generally refers to hot foods, chilies and ginger and black pepper, long pepper, for example, Um, so when we think about this idea of taste, okay, this concept is culturally mitigated. All right. So in other words, not that long ago, in the United States, we thought of taste as comprising 4 categories: sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. Yet but yet at the same time in Japan, there was a 5th taste that was, commonly considered. And then 20 years or so ago, as I mentioned, in the United States, we adopted umami in a more mainstream fashion. Yet still in other parts of the world, like Southeast Asia or in South Asia, these ideas of astringency and pungency are part and parcel of their daily conversation around the elements that ought to be present in the food that you cook. Okay, and I like to include all 7 of these elements in taste. Now, flavor is largely based upon aroma and your sense of smell. All right, and we collectively, as people, we have the ability to pick up thousands of different smells, and just like any other activity that we might partake in, you can practice smelling and make your smell muscle a little bit stronger. And I think the folks that might do that the best are those that are in the wine world and are training to become a sommelier, someone who specializes in not just the knowledge, but all that sensory activity that goes along with wine tasting. And for example, a lemon has a sour taste. It often has other tastes too, but we associate sourness as a primary taste, but then the lemon aroma that informs the flavor, okay, of the lemon. Now, next to that, we might have a lime that has a sour flavor, but it's distinctly different because the aroma is different, right? The flavor is different. It is a lime flavor, okay? Now, again, I want to mention that most foods have more than one taste associated with them. So, for example, a lime is very often sour and it's quite bitter. And so once we slow down and really engage with our food at a little bit deeper level, we can start to pick up on the astringency and the bitterness that might be subtle, right, compared to other elements that are more pronounced in a given food item. Okay, and so hopefully that discussion, helps shed some light on the difference between these ideas of flavor and taste as we're discussing and writing about food. Okay, but that process, of course, starts with thinking about food. All right. And then the second part of your question, Betty, addresses texture and mouthfeel. And I would say offhand that those are the same thing. Okay. Now, however, we can talk about texture in terms of a visual texture, like what does a food look like in terms of its texture versus what does it feel like on the palate. And both of those can be important, right? And because the look of a food, right, via its presentation can be a very important selling point or engagement point for the consumer. Okay, if it looks off-putting, a person may never even give themselves a chance to try your food, for example. Okay, but basically those are one and the same: mouthfeel and texture. Okay, thank you. All right, next question. See, the meals and bowls section says to use non-sweet fruit when making a bowl meal. Why not sweet fruit? Also, the course emphasizes lunch, dinner, and desserts. What about breakfast? Do you have suggestions for a breakfast grain bowl? Yes. My quick response to the first part of your question, non-sweet fruit, is simply, what comes to mind for me as an example is, that most people aren't going to put let's say, strawberries on their dinner bowl. And so when we talk about non-sweet fruits, we're talking about cucumbers and tomatoes, often called vegetable fruits, or even vegetables by a lot of people. That's what comes to mind for me. And then the second part of your question regarding breakfast bowls, why is there emphasis on lunch, dinner, and desserts and not breakfast? Offhand, I don't know. I'll revisit that section and see how that reads. But otherwise, as far as breakfast goes, maybe this is where your sweet fruit appear, right? Whether it's blueberries or strawberries. And, I will start this little conversation by saying that I most often eat savory food for breakfast. And savory oatmeal is a common preparation in our kitchen. But if you want to lean towards something that is maybe a little more sweet and breakfast-like, at least in an American sense, reach for a grain of your choice, whether it's oats, right, or quinoa, or anything else, right? It could be rye berries, it could be bulgur. It is your choice. It could even be pasta, right, for that matter. Couscous makes a nice foundation for a breakfast bowl. And then, with that, you might include some dried fruit. I'm a big fan of figs and dates, but anything works well. Cranberries add tartness. Dried blueberries lend some nice sweetness. And of course, there are raisins and so many other things. Also add fresh fruit, and it could be crunchy items like apples, or it could be softer yet firm things like pears or persimmon, or at least some persimmons. You might choose some other types of soft berries, which of course are very popular in the breakfast time anyway. Okay, and then for a dressing or a topping, really depends on your palate preference. It could be a drizzle of honey. It could be a little bit of yogurt or a non-dairy yogurt if you prefer. It could be a squeeze of lemon or lime juice, as some quick examples go. All right, so give that a try and see if there's a combination in there that appeals to you. Thank you. All right, next up, hello, Mary Jo. Are you aware of any resource or book on sugar-free or low-sugar jam making? Offhand, I'm not. I would need to look on the internet, and with that in mind, I will suggest to you that you look on the internet. There's bound to be, I would guess, lots of information on this topic. It sounds like a pretty mainstream topic. All right, thank you. And next question. For sauteing vegetables and perhaps tofu, do you prefer cast iron or carbon steel for a skillet? And skillet-wise, do you have a preference for either enameled cast iron or non-coated? No, I don't have a preference in either one of these or in any of these categories that you've mentioned. Here at home, we have a lot of different cookware, and I'll use different cookware for a given food item from time to time, just to have some fun, just to switch things up. And it's just a matter of getting used to whatever it is that you're using. Okay, and anything can work well. Okay, whether it's stone or a clay pot or stainless steel, enamel cast iron, or something else. So, as I often say, and I come from a place of encouragement, give it a try. Okay, and spend enough time with that given tool or equipment or appliance or ingredient to get to know it in different ways, okay, so that you've got some control over that item, okay? And I think this is how we deepen our knowledge and we expand our comfort zone, right, around cooking. And this also allows you to step into, eventually anyway, step into any cooking situation, such as somebody else's kitchen, and use whatever is on hand very comfortably to produce beautiful food. Okay, so it's just part of the bigger picture of learning. Thank you. All right, next question from Melissa. What is the best procedure for baking tofu in the oven? Would you toss them in a sauce? Well, I would, line the pan in some fashion, whether it's a silicone baking mat, or as we talked about earlier, it could be a sheet of aluminum foil, it could be parchment paper, your choice, and put that into the oven. And if you are just doing a straight bake, then you might work with a temperature of 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 375 degrees Fahrenheit as a starting point. You can even use the broiler setting if you want to introduce some faster browning on the top surface. Or, as we discussed a little bit ago, you can flip on the convection fan and speed things up. Okay. Would you put a sauce on it? Sometimes I do. And it just depends on what I'm going to use it for. So if you're going to use a sauce, just be aware that if it has a relatively high sugar content, that it's going to brown relatively faster than a lower sugar content or a setting with no added sugar. Okay. So just be sure to check your product accordingly. And you might even just kind of, turn the light on inside the oven and take a peek every couple, 3 or 4 minutes and see how it's changing in the oven. This is also a really fun way to better understand cooking, right? Is to just stick your face up against the window of the oven door if you have a window, or give it a little peek once in a while. Or if you're cooking in a different sort of way, to just stay close to the food and listen to it and watch it very closely and feel the heat. Just understand all these elements of the cooking process, and you will really deepen your understanding of cooking. All right, but give that a try. Thank you. And next up from Warren, when you make vegetable stock, as we learned in the cooking course, do you have any use for the ingredients after the vegetable stock is strained? What are your thoughts about freezing vegetable scraps and using them to make vegetable stock? So to part one of your question, some things that come to mind that I have done and I've seen others do are to incorporate that vegetable matter that you've strained into soups and sauces. You can puree them even further so they're a little bit more smooth, and they act as a thickener in a way. They certainly add body to a preparation. They can be incorporated into a casserole preparation, a one-pot meal in some sort of just by folding it in. And they can be incorporated into savory pancakes. And those are a few things that come to mind. And those are all, in my opinion, in our home, just good ways to use that material. Okay, and I appreciate you asking this question because I think it's important, not just desirable, but really important to use all of our food items in the kitchen, and to be frugal rather than wasteful when it comes to food. Food is it's a sacred sort of an item, right? That is life-giving, and I think to show our respect, the least we can do, right, is to use it rather than throw it out. All right. And then to part two of your question, Warren, what are my thoughts on freezing items, letting things accumulate, and then using that in stock? I think it's a perfect way to go. It's a technique that is relatively commonly used, both in home kitchens as well as professional kitchens, because it extends the shelf life, obviously, right, of those items. And so, yeah, I think it's a great thing to do. Thank you. All right, next question. I would like to learn more about specific spices, particularly those grouped geographically. I would like a basic knowledge of, for example, Moroccan spices or Jamaican spices. Do you have recommendations on where I can start? Well, I mean, in terms of, the internet information and YouTube, try a search and see what you come up with. You're bound to come up with lots of information on flavor profiles, regional flavor profiles. The other thing to consider is a book called The Flavor Bible. There are other books in this category that deal with cooking from the perspective of breaking it down into ways to develop flavor. And then within this approach is the regional cuisine sort of logic. And, that's an easy one, right? That absolutely makes sense. The folks that have been cooking like this for hundreds of years do it because it tastes good, at least to them. That's what they become used to. And so I think it's a great place to start your study and, try things out. And I would also say, don't be afraid to make some substitutions to ingredients if it's necessary to do so. Certain ingredients may not always be available. Sometimes we might think they are cost prohibitive. And so we might choose, not to acquire a particular item. Just move forward and give the rest of the combinations a go and see how you like it. Okay. And know that if an item has been removed, if an ingredient has been removed from a dish or a spice blend, the result is going to be different. But that doesn't make it a bad thing. Okay. Also understand, I'm going to give you some context here. Understand that when we see, for example, a recipe that says it's a Moroccan spice blend, there are many ways of making that Moroccan spice blend. Okay. In other words, people in Morocco also run out of ingredients sometimes. And so they make substitutions themselves. And what they produce is still a Moroccan spice blend. It will taste different, but it can be equally delicious. And so just have a heart and open mind toward experimentation and have some fun with it. Okay. I think this idea of getting to know spices is worthwhile. In fact, we have an archived live event that focuses on the topic of spices. And so you might consider viewing that as well. Okay. Spices provide a lot of health benefits. They come with lots of different phytochemicals, right? These are phytonutrients that are only found in plants. And spices are just a wonderful way to capture those things in your diet, as well as bring aromatic and therefore flavor interest to your food. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up, the question is, as a health coach, how would you recommend I implement these newly learned recipes and skills into my coaching program for clients? Wow. This is a fun question. And, I occasionally do some coaching in this sort of a space. Usually it's around Ayurveda. And my approach is to keep it simple and ask your client questions to get to know their diet and how they cook, what their skill level is. For example, what their comfort level is around new ingredients or new cooking techniques, and then give them a chef tip of the day, maybe a couple of them. And then let them go away for a couple of weeks and give this stuff a practice until your next meeting. And then, regroup, reflect on the experience, and then give them another tip on how they might create meals in a bowl, right? For breakfast, lunch, dinner, and for snacks, for example. How they might incorporate spices, right, into their diet for the many benefits that they bring with them. Okay. And so, in this way, I would recommend, it's been successful for me, I would recommend just kind of taking it easy, right, at the pace of your client, rather than trying to heap a bunch of information on them, okay? But I think for you, True, dig into this material and practice so that you can more deeply understand these concepts from different perspectives. And that will make you, right, a much stronger and informed coach as you work with your clients. Okay. And I see that Patrick just posted the link to our archived live event on spices. So I hope all of you will take a look at that. Thank you. And the next question, is there a shopping or grocery list that we can print for all activities? Asking because that way, when I get to an activity, I don't have to stop, run to the store, or wait a day to start activity. At present, I will say that this is a project that is just got some momentum at our end. So we don't have that tool in place. We ask you to click ahead, into the next lesson, for example, and just get an idea of what's coming around the corner so that you can take a look at your choice of recipes. This is the other part of the challenge, right? You look at your choice of recipes, choose the one that appeals to you, and understand that you might elect to make some changes and compile your shopping list in that manner. All right, thank you. And next up, what are the best veggie scraps to use for stock? I would say use whatever is called for in the stock recipe that you're using. At least start with that, which means your basic mirepoix ingredients, right? So onion, celery, and carrots. And then think about what other aromatics appeal to you, okay? Whether it is, maybe it's garlic or fennel bulb, right? Or something else. Could be tomato, right? We often add tomato as a source of acidity as well as the flavor. And it also adds some color, especially for dark stocks. Okay, but give it a try. The one sort of category of food that I generally steer clear of would be starchy items like potatoes, because they lend an opaque, sort of a cloudy look to the stock. But this may well depend on what you're making and therefore your preference. Okay. Also think about the flavors, of course, that accompany these particular items that you might choose to include or reject. All right. Thank you. And next up from Anna Maria. I have a vision of starting a nonprofit soup kitchen that offers training as a form of rehabilitation to those struggling to find employment in their recoveries. I need to gain more experience and develop a business plan. What else do you suggest? Wow, you have hit upon the two items that I would suggest. I think experience is huge. And I will say that in the world of cooking, cooking professionally, for example, or cooking, in large volume, you mentioned nonprofit, but there's still some balance that needs to be maintained, right, in terms of food cost and these other elements of the business. And the world of cooking can be very strange. And your knowledge in your home kitchen often doesn't cut it in a professional setting or in a large volume cooking setting because of these idiosyncrasies that come up. And so this is where I think it's important to spend some time working in a setting that you want to replicate. All right, so try to find a a non-profit soup kitchen or a similar place, and either volunteer, right? Most likely volunteer, right? Or otherwise work in some capacity, and get as deep as you can into the various functions of that organization. So there is the ordering of the food, there is the prep of the food, there's the storage and the cooking, there's the holding of food prior to service, there's holding of food under refrigeration and in the freezer, looking ahead to service at a later time. And of course, all of the business functions that go along with such an organization. Bookkeeping, taking care of labor expenses, or volunteer hours, or whatever else might be a part of that picture, as well as the food safety and sanitation that needs to be adhered to each day and each moment of the day. Staff training is also a big part of that. Okay, and so the first thing for you to do is essentially to train yourself by gaining more experience. All right. Now, the other part is a business plan. And just underneath your question here, Patrick has loaded a link to score.org, which is an organization that is part of the U.S. Small Business Administration. And if you take a look at SCORE, you'll see that they offer many services free of charge. And they've got advisors in probably any industry that you can think of, including food service. And you can pair up with these folks, bounce ideas off of them, get advice, and so on and so forth. And I think this is a great resource for a lot of people. SCORE, probably more often than not, helps folks that are out to start a business. But I think your idea, Anna Maria, falls right in line with this organization as well. So give them a try. Thank you. All right, next up. When a recipe says to add liquid and then simmer for X amount of minutes, do you bring to a boil and then turn down the heat to a simmer? Or what is the best way to get to a simmer? So, one thing that, I have said thousands of times to my students is bring it to a boil and reduce it to a simmer. Okay, and I got to the point where I would just say BTABRTAS, and the students knew that meant bring to a boil, reduce to a simmer. And generally speaking, we in order to conserve time, we just turn up the heat in order to get the pot of liquid up to temperature as soon as we can, because usually that's fine, and there's no sense in waiting a lot longer for it. And my background is in professional kitchens where time is of the essence, so we're often working on high heat. But I would fundamentally recommend the same approach for the home cook. Now, you got to stay with it, okay, so that it doesn't come to a boil and stay there and boil away until you happen to notice it again. Because food can be damaged or, tossed around in ways that we don't want if it's rolling around in a boil for too long. Okay. Now, with that in mind, as you engage with your food, start to recognize from a distance what a boiling pot looks like versus a simmering pot in terms of the amount of steam coming off of the surface. They look very different. Okay. Also, listen to your food and train yourself to understand what the sound of a boiling pot is versus a simmering pot. The noise is different, for example. Okay. And so you can have your back to the pot and you can know what's going on. All right. And so give all this stuff a try. This is the beauty of cooking. You get to use all of your senses. And don't forget to talk to your food once in a while too. All right. Thank you. Next up, what can I sub for tamari? So tamari, is a subcategory of soy sauce. And so feel free to just reach for any old bottle of soy sauce, so long as the flavor fits your desired profile for soy sauce, because there are many, many different types of soy sauce out there. And if you don't have soy sauce or don't want to use soy sauce, then consider something like Bragg's Aminos, which is a popular item that I see out there. Okay, and again, give that a try and see how that suits your palate. Thank you. And next, is there an ingredient you can easily substitute out spinach for besides kale? I'm allergic to spinach and dislike kale. Yeah, I mean, basically, I would say think about any other green leafy vegetable, whether it's bok choy or collards or something else. And it's all about you finding something that you like, texture-wise and flavor-wise, and is it otherwise going to be compatible with the other ingredients and that finished dish that you have in mind? Okay, so give it a try. There are a lot of choices out there, and then start. If you don't already, take a look at some other grocery stores, some new grocery stores that might not be part of your regular circuit, and start to discover greens that are part of the cooking from other cultures. And again, this is a wonderful way to expand your knowledge and your experience around food and cooking. Thank you. And next from Aaron. I like using red miso in my soups and stews. I recently purchased white miso. Do you have any favorite recipes for white and red miso? What are the differences? It has a high sodium content, so I try not to use too much. Is there a recipe to make my own? Okay, so we have a few questions here. Let me tease these apart. And let me first say that I'm a big fan of miso. I grew up with miso, and always have a container of at least one container in the fridge. Right now it's white miso. I usually have red and sometimes a different style. There are many, many styles of miso. In the United States, where I live, we often see maybe 3 or 4 varieties at the grocery store. But if you're in Japan, you'll find dozens, potentially dozens and dozens of varieties, and they vary by region. And so if you grew up with something in your particular region in Japan, you still may not be familiar with many, many dozens of miso types. But anyway, back to your questions. Do I have favorite recipes for white and red miso? I'll say that I make miso soup every morning. That's breakfast, at least Monday through Friday. That's my schedule. And so I'm using either red or white or a combination of the two. Okay, so feel free to mix and match. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's done quite commonly in the Japanese kitchen in order to find a balance that suits that desired outcome of yours, right? You are the cook and you are in charge. Now, certainly if you were to look at Japanese recipes, there are sort of traditional contexts and traditional styles of a given preparation that might call for a particular style of miso. And if you start to mix and match and change miso varieties for that given dish, there might be some purists that say it's no longer that, but that's fine, right? If you enjoy it, then call it yours. So you think about soup. As a breakfast, right? You mentioned soups anyway in your opening, but I use it in my spaghetti sauce, my tomato sauce, just enough to add that umami, right? That additional flavor complexity that everybody enjoys, but not enough that it's obviously miso flavor. That's that delicacy that you want to balance. Okay. In terms of differences, many white varieties have notable sweetness attached to it, whereas many red varieties have a more salty, sort of a flavor. But there's certainly overlap, right, in some of those characteristics. I recommend trying them side by side, and also throw in some other varieties into the mix, into your inventory, to get to know them. There are preparations in the traditional Japanese kitchen where miso is cooked with egg yolk and soy sauce and mirin and even a shot of sake, cooked down to a thick paste. And then that paste is smeared on top of a different food, like a thick slice of tofu or a seafood steak, and then baked and broiled for a nice, savory, salty, umami deep sauce that's got that caramelization from the broiler. Those are some things that we've done at home here in recent weeks. But yeah, indeed, sodium is part of the deal, and so I think you're on the right foot being aware of that. Okay, but otherwise, take a look on the interwebs, right, the internet, and look for first of all Japanese recipes that call for miso, and then make changes, right, so that they fit your palate, your audience, your kitchen. And have some fun with miso. Miso can also be made. There are some directions I would recommend digging deep into to find a good source. Okay, miso is all about the bacteria. All right, and so you got to be careful not to contaminate it. It needs to be kept in the correct temperature range. And miso, in that sense, is also a seasonal food. So once you run through that batch, then you can look forward to another batch of miso. Okay, but it's a very nice process. And I hope you give it a try. Thank you. All right, next question. When sweating onions in a stainless steel pan, how do we keep them from browning? I'm specifically referring to the bechamel sauce task, and say that we should not be browning the onions. Is the mercury ball heat level the right starting point for this? Aha. So your final question, okay, is the pivot point here. The mercury ball test is going to have your pan at a really high temperature, and way too high for sweating, where we fundamentally do not want to impart any color. So just barely turn on your pan, your heat, to a moderately low temperature, probably at the highest, and then get your product in there, and even put a lid on it, because that's going to keep the moisture in, and that's going to keep browning at bay. Give it a stir as needed, because the longer an item makes contact with the pan, the more it's going to dry out on that surface, and browning will set in. So stir the product. You can even add liquid periodically if the pan gets too dry and you see browning setting in. Okay, so you can control the pan temperature and the dryness and the browning by the addition of liquid. Liquid can be stock. It could be water, right, or some other flavorful liquid of your choice. All right, thank you. All right, and so follow-up from True. You're welcome. And let's see, I focus on helping clients eat clean and lose weight. Perfect. Yeah, those are probably the most common concerns, right, for clients that that I see as well. Okay, that's perfect. And I think you're heading down the right path, right, as the coach. Thank you. All right, let's see. Next up, this is from Adam. There's a shopping list in the first unit. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Adam, for sharing this. This will relate to the earlier question. And next from Martin. What's the best way for long-term storage of nori and dulse flakes? They are expensive ingredients that will only be used occasionally. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. I have held nori in the freezer, tightly wrapped, in plastic wrap and also in a Ziploc bag. And I've, also had nori just sitting in the pantry for probably longer, well, I'll just say for a while, to the point where that little pack of desiccant is all blown up and the nori has gotten a little, soggy, so to speak, from the humidity, right? And in which case, I pull it back and forth over the burner in order to dry it out. You just give it a few passes on each side. It dries up, it crisps up, although it has a tendency to wrinkle. And so just keep that in mind in terms of your intended application. Okay. Dulse flakes, consider the refrigerator or the freezer, both of which are fundamentally, dry environments, and they also slow down any sort of metabolic activity with respect to microbes. Okay, thank you. And next question. How do you make biscuits crunchy? I am a kid who likes cooking a lot. How to make biscuits crunchy? Well, this is an interesting question. A couple of things come to mind. One is you can turn the oven temp up a little bit, and you're going to get some, more drying and browning around the edges and the bottom. Try to maintain some balance there so you don't get too much color on the bottom, based upon your preference. Another approach to try out is to just leave the biscuits in the oven at the normal temperature a little bit longer, although that's often not the best choice because they will just dry out more. Okay, but you might give both a try, and just so you understand that cooking process, and you'll understand what you like best depending on your desired end result. Another, again, depending on how you're serving these or what you're eating it with, you might even try to roll them thinner, or just make some thinner dough, so that there's less volume to work with as it rises in the oven. And so a thinner dough, right, as you get closer to, let's say, a cracker, if you think about how crunchy a cracker is, right, and how tender a cake is, right, then you can imagine what's going to happen to a biscuit as it rises more and you control and maintain moisture, versus you make it thinner and dry it out more. So you can adjust the thickness of the biscuit as well. But again, depending on how you intend to use it. All right, so give those things a try. And I imagine you'll probably find something that you like. Thank you. All right, next question. I have a new nonstick frying pan. I have dry sauteed leeks and onions in it, sometimes putting a plate on top to help them soften gently. Is there a particular type of frying pan that's best for dry frying, please? In my opinion, there's not a best frying pan. For me, it's always about getting accustomed to the technology that I'm using. And, I guess if you want ease, then a non-stick pan, of some sort, but it sounds like you're using a non-stick pan of some sort, but a stick coated pan of some sort is going to be best in terms of just that the convenience of it all, especially if it's a no oil method you're using. But otherwise, any pan's fine. Get to know how it acts and reacts on the fire and with food in the pan. Thank you. Hello, Sylvia. This is my first time attending your event. My question is, what's the best way to making margarita pizza? Well, gosh, this is, I think, a little bit of a deeper study here. But, I like pizza with a thinner crust, which is often what we see in a quote-unquote traditional margarita-style pizza. And then, of course, all your components need to be to your liking, right? Whether it's the flavor intensity of the tomato sauce or the viscosity of that sauce, as well as the cheese, and then the quality of the basil that you're using in this beautiful, simple Italian classic. What I use in the oven in terms of baking pizzas is a steel plate. And I went down to a steel yard here in town, and I measured the inside of the oven, basically the size of the rack in the oven, and had them cut a steel plate that fits right on my rack. And let me think here. I've got a plate that's a 1/4 inch thick, but I would recommend 3/8 of an inch. It's going to hold a little bit more heat and give just a little more browning to the bottom of the pies that you're making. The 1/4 inch steel plate that I have does quite well, and otherwise not bad, but I would go for a little bit thicker one next time. And the way you do this is you got to preheat the oven for, upwards of an hour in order to get that box hot, get that pan nice and hot with a lot of heat being held. Get your peel loaded up with your pizza, drop that in on the plate. Just before you put the pizza in, I should say, okay, let me start over here. Preheat your oven at the highest temperature, 550 degrees or whatever the highest temperature is, for about an hour. Just before you put the pies into the oven, turn the oven off, switch it to the broiler setting on high. All of this is at the highest rack position, so you're about this far below the broiler, okay? You're going to drop your pizza in there, and within about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, you're going to have a pizza ready, okay? And you can just keep on moving some pizzas through there. Now, the faster you move, the more you draw heat out of the plate, which is why I recommend a slightly thicker plate. But otherwise, you can just keep on making pizzas, and we'll cook 4, 5, or 6 of them at a time. And that's not a problem for us with our setup. But that's what I would recommend. Thanks. All right. Next up, can a quality silpat be used to collect drippings, overflow, etc. from any food, or is it only intended for baking goods? A silpat, right, or a silicone baking sheet is fine for any cooking. Please take a look at the manufacturer's handling guidelines in terms of the maximum temperature under which it should be used, okay, which is often around 450 or 60 degrees or so. But take a look at your product specifically, okay? They will brown permanently at extra high temperatures, speaking from experience. And I would imagine that at that temperature, there's probably some off-gassing that takes place as well. But just take a look at the guidelines. Thank you. And Sylvia says, hello, and hello, Sylvia. Nice to have you for the first time. So my question is, what kind of spices or food can I give to someone who has got diabetes? Let's see. Generally, if you're talking about somebody with diabetes, right, you want to have sort of maximum control, right, in terms of the digestive and assimilation process. So things that are high in fiber are recommended. You want to, so complex carbs, right, are for most people are going to be fine. You got the fiber to mitigate some of the uptake of the carbs after they've been broken down into the more simple versions. Certainly keeping an eye on added sugar as well as added fat. And added, fats are also a part of this bigger discussion on diabetes. Okay, and spices. Generally speaking, spices are a good thing. I would want to brush up a little bit on any specific spices that I might suggest. But start out with this idea of good balance and lots of fiber, watching both added fat and added sugar, right? That's just a very general approach. Otherwise, for specific conditions, you might consider consulting a dietitian to get a plan in place, again, depending on what you're doing. All right, thank you. And next up from Andrew, what are some do's and don'ts with MSG? Well, MSG, wow, this is kind of like the earlier question about using aluminum foil, right? I think this is totally up to the user, the consumer, the cook. I will, putting this into my own context, I grew up in an era when we had a shaker of MSG, Ajinomoto, on the dinner table every day. And so I went through this phase of my life just shaking that stuff left and right, probably morning, noon, and night. And that was all fine with me. I think I turned out fine. Now, if one has a concern about consuming MSG, then definitely reduce the intake or just avoid it altogether. I think, first of all, everything in moderation is a good way to live life. But certainly if somebody has a particular concern about MSG, right, in this case, then in order to bring the anxiety or stress level down, avoiding it is quite fine as well. All right, thank you. And looks like our last question of the day. Always wanted to know, does a fruit salad, as in only mixed fruit of some sort, have its place on a table next to a vegetable salad, or is it more concerned to be an end of a meal treat? Okay, great. So, Zarko, this is a beautiful question about food culture. And, I think these ways of composing a meal, they differ, across the world, regionally, and also through time, right? Culture is a living sort of a phenomenon because it's comprised of people, and people are always changing, and therefore culture is always changing and shifting, sometimes fast and sometimes very slowly. As people, being part of the culture, right, the fabric of culture, we have the ability to interpret the way we do life and the way we set a table and the way that we compose a menu. And, certainly there are rules in some contexts. And then other times those rules are much more relaxed. And so we have more opportunity to make them fit our own preference. And just speaking for myself personally, I don't have a problem having a fruit salad along with the savory items on the table. In fact, another perspective from which we might look at this interesting topic that you brought up is the idea of a buffet, where it's not uncommon, right, to see everything out at the same time, including the sweet courses. Okay, and I'll tell you, my strategy very often at a buffet. Because everyone gets in line, at the traditional starting point, and the line is really long. I go to the end of the buffet and I start with dessert first because the line is short, and then I'm happy to eat my savory foods after that. So I'll let you interpret this however you're comfortable doing so. Thank you very much, and thank you to the rest of you, right, for joining me today during my office hours. And I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, happy cooking to each and all of you. Thank you.